Well, we've been discussing your journey as a practice transformer. We've talked about how profoundly important it is to have a vision of the transformation that we hope to effect in practice. And in order to reach that desired future better state, we absolutely have to have a roadmap and some guides along the way to get us there. So as the third week in the course, you're now well familiar with some of the models and concepts we're going to as our roadmap. We've talked about using the sustained model for transformation, which has been adapted from the seed scale model and the Taylor-Ide and Taylor text that you're reading, as well as using Melnick's evidence-based practice model. So here, Just and Lasting Change talks about this model for sustained transformation, and then Melnick's evidence-based practice. So these will become your great friends in the course of our time together. So let's begin this third week by looking at the 4 principles for sustained transformation. We have said that the ultimate goal of our DNP projects is to transform health, and to do so in a way that's sustainable, that will outlive our DNP projects and the investment of time that we give in this work, and that is also innovative, that does something better than the way it was done yesterday, and is just and takes care of all the relevant participants. And when that's happening, there are also some guides and road marks and processes that we can use for expanding that success using the scale process, which we'll talk about later. So let's do a little exemplar in practice to see how these 4 principles play out. So if we're going with the shared goal of transforming health, there are 3 components that we've said mark that transformation: that it's sustainable, that it can outlive the DNP project and our investment in the process. It's innovative, it builds on what is known and moves into new frontiers to do things better than we have done in the past. It's also just, involving all the relevant stakeholders, party, and participants. So those 3 together are the basis for transformation. But when we think about what is underneath or behind the transformation process, there are many things that can contribute to transformation. And in chapter 3 of the Taylor's work, they talk about three different models for transformation. One of those that they discuss is the additive approach, which is where the transformation is happening from the grassroots up. Starts at the front lines, and change and improvements are added to each other to grow a more significant or more substantive impact or transformation. They talk about the explosion approach, where it's a rapid response to a crisis, like when you have a flood in Bangladesh and you mobilize international support, or there's a tornado and the power companies come out to quickly restore power. You mobilize mass vaccine campaigns in low and middle income contexts. So there's an explosion of energy and effort to meet concrete goals and objectives in a very short period of time. And the final one they talk about is a blueprint approach, where you sort of have a map of what has worked well in one place, and then you design and customize it to fit into another. And it's often driven by technical experts. So each of those 3 approaches to transformation, they give a critique for and talk about some of the gaps that are missing in those approaches to transformation. And so what we're talking about in the DNP project is a way to create transformation that's more sustained and is more integrated and longitudinal than either of those 3 approaches tend to be. And one of the key strengths of what we're proposing for your DNP projects is that you integrate the strengths of those partners. With the additive approach, you're bringing the grassroots frontline practitioners up and they're building on success. But there are often fewer strategies for scaling that to other areas. In an explosion approach, you have a rapid input of resources from the top in order to meet clear objectives and goals, but there's often less effort given to sustaining positive impact from that intervention plan. And the blueprint approach is often designed by someone with a special expertise and knowledge, but may not have as much grounding in the context and may have limited opportunities to engage the stakeholders who are administrative decision makers and frontline implementers. So there are many ways to achieve transformation, but what we're proposing here for your DMP project is that you think about this long term, how you do it sustainably, how to use the best evidence, and how do you help it to outlive your lifespan with the project and be shared with other contexts. So in light of that goal, to achieve just sustained transformation, we need energy. We need inputs. We need energy of people and participants. Those other three approaches tend to have energy come in one direction. So with an explosion, you have a rapid input of resources. From the bottom up, you have a lot of perhaps social cohesion and mobilization. And from the blueprint approach, you have a lot of technical content expertise. So there certainly is energy going in, but the energy is often one directional, from the expert, from the grassroots, from the government. And what we're proposing here is that in order to achieve more just, sustainable transformation, we need the energy of the participants, the human energy. So we're going to talk about how to catalyze energy or investment. And there can be catalysts that happen to get this process going. And 4 of those we're going to discuss as the principles for sustained transformation from the seed scale model. And those catalysts for getting people involved, buying in, participating, and working together are key attributes to have them invested. And investing their technical expertise if they're an expert, investing their financial resources and decision-making power if they're a top-down partner, or investing their energy and creativity as frontline practitioners. But what we want to do is look at how we can maximize the sustained transformation of your DMP projects so that as you design them, you can design them with scalability in mind. So let's take an example of one community health center and the catalyst for the change process. So this community health center was experiencing several challenges. And if you've worked in community health, you probably are familiar with some of these: resourcing, skill, retention, and so forth. But in this particular health center, it was one site within a larger system. And at this one site, clinicians were identifying that when they went into the room to see patients, the vital signs, the blood pressures, and the heart rates were not even accurate. And in addition, when they went in to do procedures like incision and drainages or IUD insertions, pelvic exams, the equipment that they needed to do those procedures had not been set up by the medical assistant that they were working with. And so the physician or nurse practitioner would then need to go and take the vital signs themselves, or set up for the procedure themselves, or call someone to set the procedure up. And at times, even after they called for the procedure set up, again, future gaps were identified. So collectively, these limited the clinic's ability to keep patients flowing through the system because there were so many stops in care. And so what happened is this problem of vital sign accuracy and procedure setup was recognized by one of the participating clinicians in the system. And then they said, this isn't right, that we can't serve our patients who are in such need of clinical care when we're having to deal with these system issues. So they began to work with the medical director and the chief medical officer in the system to have some time devoted to transforming that practice. And incidentally, around the same time, the medical system hired a director of continuous quality improvement. And so this clinical problem of the vital sign accuracy and the procedure setups was identified by one clinician, but taken outside of that clinician's individual experience to their medical director and the medical director of the whole system, and partnered with the clinical quality improvement initiative happening in the entire medical system. So that problem actually became an opportunity under these conditions. So let's take a look at some of the features of this opportunity and see how these 4 principles could be used here. So in this particular health system, it had medical branches headed by a chief medical officer, financial division, had a dental division, and then a division that focused on social and behavioral care, including things like a nursing home, youth programs, and many other activities besides their medical and dental approaches. So within the medical system, there were 14 primary medical clinics that were led by a medical director, and each of those clinics had physicians and nurse practitioners, lead medical assistants that worked under the leads, and health educators. So that's a little bit of how the system was oriented. And we're going to now break that look down further from the big entire system to this one particular clinic before we take a break. So at this particular clinic, one of the 14, as you can see here, one of these clinics had 6 physicians and primary care nurse practitioners, 2 lead medical assistants, 8 additional medical assistants that worked as the primary medical assistant team. They were the ones primarily responsible for the throughput of the patients in the clinical process. There's also a health educator who gave motivational interviewing and behaviorally oriented education to patients, and 2 patient navigators and mobilizers who worked under the one of the physicians and the educator. So this was the primary human resource team at this particular facility. So this one clinician from the team of 6 who had some background in health system and program design began to work on this problem that the physicians and nurse practitioners were experiencing. And under traditional systems like an explosion approach or blueprint approach, you could very easily have a division between the medical nurse practitioner staff and the medical assistant staff, where the physician nurse practitioner staff says, you're failing to do vital signs and set up for procedures, and you have then the medical assistant staff coming back conflictual, and you could have tension very easily in that situation. So instead of setting up a relationship and dialogue about medical assistant failure, which is the standard approach oftentimes in U.S. healthcare, the clinician lead for clinical quality improvement said, instead of focusing on the problem, let's focus on using these 4 principles for sustained change and focus on the voice of the medical assistants. So they began to work with, after getting the permission from the medical director to have time devoted to this activity and the ultimate approval of the chief medical officer, they partnered with the manager at the local facility to change their clinical schedule and linked the clinical quality improvement activities at this one center to the quality improvement activities of the system as a whole. And the way that they began to do that was working with the lead medical assistants and the other medical assistants to say, okay, you have a monthly meeting, let's get together at that meeting and do physician, nurse practitioner, and medical assistant team building. And we're going to start by asking the medical assistants what their perceived greatest need for clinical change is based on their workflow and their world. So let's come back in part 2 and look at this in greater detail.